First, you divide, then you conquer. A term familiar to most, but what does it mean in the context of colorism? Colorism is a global phenomenon that is enacted by people all over the world, both intentionally and unintentionally, that promotes white supremacy and anti-blackness. Colorism is a structure that gives people of color with lighter skin a place of privilege in social, cultural, and political institutions. Colorism is white supremacy. Although a type of within-group racism, its foundations are in colonialism and established racial hierarchies of dominance. Any country in the world can be a useful example of how this is enacted, but for tonight, the focus will be on the United States and Brazil. The United States serves as a good example of a country where the majority is white. It showcases how this is enacted when white supremacy is intact. Brazil, having the second largest black population outside of Nigeria, they prove a useful example of how this is enacted when the majority is not white. Analyzing these particular places, I will highlight the permeating consequences of colorism and how we can stop participation in this oppressive reproductive system that allows us to dismantle white supremacy. It was after dinner, and I was about 13 or 14 years old. We were talking around the table normally like we do, and of course, I was talking the most. And it must have been close to summertime or around then because I decided to say something along the lines of, I don't want to be outside too long. I'll get too dark. In that moment, I caught the strongest side eye I have ever seen to this day. However, to my understanding, I had done nothing wrong. In almost every corner of my life at that point, sometimes consciously and unconsciously, I learned that being lighter was better. In the context of my life in the United States, colorism was unavoidable. From the black representation that is on TV and in movies, from the light skin versus dark skin memes, I remember several forms of artistic representation reinforcing the narrative that the darker the less attractive, the darker the more dangerous, and that being lighter was somehow better. Being lighter is being seen as that much closer to whiter. Being lighter is that much closer to being seen as whiter. What that means is that we are taught to not value our many shades and colors. What colorism taught me was a different way to pass, a way to be celebrated for being black, but not too black. Colorism taught me a different way to pass. Being lighter is being seen as that much closer to whiter. And it wasn't until I started attending university that I could understand and study and articulate these patterns and learn how and why this existed. After attending university, I started learning about the history of colorism in the United States. Its roots are in slavery, as with many other things in this country. Colorism was founded on the principle that although one drop of black blood was the only qualification for being enslaved, the work distribution was unequal. Willie Lynch, a British slave owner from the West Indies, came to the colony of Virginia in 1712 to deliver a speech about his method of having control over his slaves. His prominent and most promising practice was to divide them by skin tone. In doing so, enslaved people who were different skin tones would be given different work that would favor lighter-skinned slaves. This created a divide in the community and a distrust between them. In the United States, this maintains white supremacy regardless of the diversity in the nation. What I learned is that I was turning my back on my community without even knowing it. Over time, this divide remastered itself in representation and continued oppression. In the 1940s, Dr. Clark did a doll study test where he asked black children to choose between a white doll and a black doll. And almost every child in that study chose a white doll and associated positive attributes to that doll. However, not much has changed. In 2010, when CNN reconducted the study, they found that both white and black children were showing white bias in favor of the lighter images. Perception of beauty and self-worth in our children is diminished by a hierarchy of shades. Yet these beliefs about beauty and too much sunlight and getting too dark are still practiced every day. It was after recitation last semester when my TA said to me, "Not all skin folk are kinfolk." What he meant was that just because you have melanin doesn't mean that you play for the entire team. It was the perfect way of understanding the power of distrust and efforts for equality. Brazil is a very mixed nation. Most of the country has some kind of African roots. And the country prides itself on being a racial democracy. And one would believe that in a country where whiteness is not the majority, there could be actual equality. Why would people of color oppress fellow people of color? Yet it happens all the time. And you might find yourself asking why. If all people of color know oppression, why would they exploit and oppress their own people? It is because people all over the world are taught to maintain this racial world order. All over the world, this problem persists, and we cannot overcome if we cannot help each other over the hurdle. This problem is not limited to the United States and Brazil. Rather, it is a globalized structure. A form of oppression so dangerous that it would force some to go to the length of skin bleaching, the literal bleaching of their skin just to enhance their opportunities and self-esteem. Markets are being created to profit from our internalized oppression. Black bodies are being put in danger. Black bodies are being put in danger. How can we achieve equality when unequal in perceptions of self? Representation is key. And anti-Blackness is bred in all communities, including those of color. Anti-Blackness is bred in all communities, including those of color. And that's because representation reflects reality. What that means is that representation is never for people to embrace the dark, but to desire the light. Representation doesn't reflect political autonomy, rather it reflects criminalization and poverty. Colorism happens in China, India, South Africa, Jamaica, and every country and continent all over the world. In an increasingly interdependent world, it is more imperative now than ever that we support and uplift one another. If we don't, we will all suffer. What I'm asking of you here today is that you think before you post that meme, that you engage all people of color in the fight to end white supremacy, and that most importantly, rather than run from the dark, you embrace it. It is only after taking these steps that we can create a beautiful mosaic of representation. And together dismantle the system that created white supremacy. Thank you.